Good morning or afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Q&A Cafe for Business by Design. Today we're doing supplier relationship management with Laura Hercalo. Just a reminder, we are recording this session, so please make sure that you stay on mute. I think I actually have that control anyways, so you'll be on mute the whole time, but please, if you have any questions or comments, just put them in the questions or the chat box, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. Next week, we have mobile app in ByDesign demonstration. So that's Wednesday, August 5th at the same time, same place. So we'll see you then. And I will hand it over to Laura.
Great. Thanks, Kayla. All right. So today we are going to cover just some different aspects of supplier relationship management and how you can use the supplier record to drive different functionality within ByDesign. And I'm also going to cover the newer feature of the supplier approval and how you can use that when somebody in the organization, maybe a purchasing manager or whatnot, creates a new supplier and you maybe as the AP person needs to review it. And then there's another function that came out recently that we'll review for access management. All right, so today's topics, again, we're going to do the supplier approval process and access restrictions. We're going to look at supplier lifecycle management and how that works in action, and how that then dovetails itself into RFQ processing. So ByDesign within 2002 was the first time that they released support for an approval workflow for new suppliers that are created in the system. And if you want to activate that, you'll go to business configuration and questions. You'll obviously want to scope in business partners. Under the questions for general business partners, there is an option called handling of business partners. And that has a whole bunch of different things around duplicate checking and how do you want to display different contacts, if you want to restrict account views for your salespeople and things like that. And then way down in the bottom, there is a question called, do you want to set up the approval process for suppliers? If you haven't seen the latest roadmap from Reiner, within the next 4 releases, the roadmap also has the introduction of new accounts and products. So you'll be seeing this pop up for other master data functions within ByDesign. So when you want to activate that, you'll set up yes, and then as soon as you finish your scoping, a new option within application and user management will show up under approval workflow called business partner approval requests. By default, only the ABC classification is available for filtering and grouping for your sections, but any of your custom fields will automatically appear as filter options, which is nice. So you can add a couple different custom fields within the system to be able to activate this. And we'll walk through an example really quickly then as well. And then once you do activate the workflow, a new button is going to appear in your new supplier screen, which previously didn't exist. And if you wind up, you can deactivate this at any point in time. For me, I switch it on and off all the time. But you'll see this submit for approval button will appear, and then these 2 buttons for new suppliers only, or the save and close button and the save button, have different functions. So it still acts as the same way, which now you don't see change status, the change status button from in preparation to activate. So your save and close and the save will only act as saving it as in preparation. And you always will have to click submit for approval for it to go off, to kick off the workflow and decide whether it needs to go through activation or approval or not. And then upon the supplier approval, in the supplier-based work center work list, there's now a new work list that's been created, which is called potential suppliers. And that's basically every supplier that's been created that's in approval status. And then from here, or within the actual supplier record, if you find that you make a mistake or you want to augment the record, as it's in the approval status, you can withdraw it from the approval process, make your changes, and then resubmit it. And then the new suppliers can be approved, rejected, or sent back for revisions. And then I'm going to show you just a little backdoor trick that I come across. And it kind of leads to being able to do some kind of interesting different workflows for if you have different people in your organization that take care of different aspects of the supplier, from maybe basic data to the communication data to purchasing and financial data. So an approver who has access to supplier-based management can also withdraw the supplier from the approval process and make changes on their own and then resubmit it. So basically, what that means for you is, and in all of the other approval processes within ByDesign, an approver only has the option to approve, reject, or send back for revision. They can't actually make changes themselves. So if it's something like a quote and you want to just key in a new discount or something else, you basically have to send it back with notes and tell them what to change, and then they go back through the workflow. In this, you actually can, if you're the approver, you can get the notification to approve something, you can withdraw it, do your changes, and then resubmit it. And if you're the approver of it, it'll automatically approve. But then the other thing to note is that once the supplier's been approved, there's not a subsequent approval workflow for changes. Once it's approved and it's ready to go. If you do make any changes to the supplier, that button for submit for approval doesn't appear anymore. All right, so let's jump into the systems. I already have activated the business configuration area, and then you'll see in here the approval processes within application and user management under task distribution. And once that is activated, you'll now see related business document, business partner approval requests, and our supplier workflow. So I'm just going to copy this guy so you can see some of the different options in here as well. So this is a very simple example of the different process steps. So you can have one or multiple steps. You can get, if you are using more complex fields to designate different types of suppliers and things like that, you can do different groupings and a multi-step type process. And in the way that I was thinking about setting this up was, or in a more stringent stepwise process where multiple people are touching the supplier record before it gets approved. You would have the initial record go into the first step in the process, somebody that does an initial check. They denote that it's been checked, and then it goes to the next person in the rule. But we'll just do a really simple example that it's just the new supplier. And then we've also got the same standard types of work distribution. So you can say direct approvers or the approval by the reporting line unit of the person creating the supplier. And then you can have, if it's multiple people, if all approvals are required, if you have 2 or 3 people that need to go into the approval, whether they need to do it or not. And then if there's a reapproval, so if maybe they're a reporting line unit and a direct approver, we're not going to say it'll skip over them if they've already approved it once. And then we've got our different groups. So again, we can say if something contains this field, or if this field has this value but not that value, or this value and that value, we can do groupings of the criteria within each of the different steps. But again, this is just a really simple example. So we've got I created a field called initial check on the supplier record. And so you'll see, again, anything with like the little brackets here are all going to be custom fields. So as I mentioned, only ABC classification right now is available by default. So if you do want to add different types of conditional types of of criteria to be able to drive workflow for only a certain subset of the suppliers that are getting created. You want to just create a field, a custom field, and add that to the supplier record with different defaults. So I've got that operator, so it says it's containing the value of no, and in this list it's only a yes or a no. The one thing that I did stumble upon, and I'm not sure if it's overall, and I will submit a ticket for it for your information, that anything that has an indicator, so a checkbox, doesn't seem to be working in here to drive the workflow properly. So that's why I chose the list. I was finding that it wasn't picking it up appropriately. So just a little side note in there for you. So once the approval process is active or done, we can go back in and then set the validity. Hopefully, if you have experience doing the workflows, but once you copy and create a new one, you actually deactivate one approval and activate the new one through the edit validity date. Right. And so I'm logged in as Eddie Smoke, and we've got Edward Black as our approver. So we'll go in and create a new supplier in here. And just do basic cut of rest. Cut above the rest supplier, and he's a supplier, and then you'll see the MRO supplier initial check, that field is set to no. So if I put it into yes and I click submit for approval, it automatically becomes an active supplier, but because I have this set to no, it will go through the approval. So then you'll see, and here's when I create my new supplier, it's going to be set in preparation, and you'll also notice that you don't have that change status button anymore, and so you always have to click submit for approval. So once I do that and I submit that for approval and I go back to my work list, and just noting that you've got that drop down button. So again, these are all my active suppliers. We do see the change status button on the active list. But when we go back into our potential suppliers, you've got our cut above the rest is going to be in our approval. And the only option that we have here is to, we won't be able to edit anything. We have to withdraw it from the approval, and then we can go back in and edit that. And so when I log in as our, oops, let's go log in as our finance guy, Edward. The other thing on the approvals would happen, are going to happen just on the UI. You can get an email notification for it, but there's no, it's not on the mobile. There's not a option in either the approvals app or the standard mobile app to be able to approve a supplier on the fly. But if you go into managing my area and the approvals, you'll see that'll pop up on your work list. So we see our two items here, the approved supplier verifying parts are cut above the rest. And so we can pop into the option in here, and we can view by the potential supplier ID. We can view all of the details related to that were entered for here. So we can validate it, but again, you're not going to be able to, not mistaken, you can't edit the data, but because you have access to approve it and you have access to create new suppliers, you can withdraw it, again, make your changes, submit it. So once let's say if I was the person that needed to go in and check it, so I'm doing my initial check and I'm validating that it's in the city here, and I'm filling in all the details that I need to. And then I flip my button for my initial check to yes, and I submit it for approval. We'll see that now will become an approved vendor. So you'll see again that'll drop off the list. So like I said, it's, for me, I think it's, even though it's probably not the overall proper process that ByDesign wants you to follow, it works out well if you want to actually make changes to the supplier. If you, like I said, if you're in the AP department and you're the ones getting all the data to be able to withdraw it, make your changes, and then reset the approval, or resubmit it for the validation of what it needs to go through the workflow, rather than having to send it back for revision and going back and forth between that person. Because if you think about someone, maybe that's in the shop or whatever, that wants to just kick off a quick purchase request or something, and they're keying in the supplier information for you, you don't want to have to go back and forth. You can look up the information on your own and go forward. And then if you reject it, so maybe you're the one also validating that you don't have that supplier record in the system at all, and you find that maybe there is a duplicate. If you go back and actually do a reject, then it will just go away. The supplier will just kind of go away, and they'll have to recreate, you'll have to recreate it in the background if you want to resubmit it. Okay, so that is the supplier approval process. Now the other area that's somewhat new is the access restriction. So within the supplier record itself, you can also restrict who can edit the bank details for the supplier. And the value of this is really more from a risk and compliance standpoint. If you've got a lot of people that can touch the record and you haven't created things like UI switches for your different roles to be able to hide and show different tabs in the supplier to users, you could very easily get yourself in a sticky situation with bank details. So if you do have, ACH payments and you're kicking off payment files and things like that, and you do have a lot of people touching the supplier record, they could very easily just key in their own bank account record without you necessarily catching it and start diverting payments to themselves. So that could expose you to a huge risk within the system. So within the newer functions here, you can actually restrict who can edit specifically the bank details for the suppliers. And this again is in the general business configuration in the questions under general business partners, handling of business partners. And so you'll see an option here, do you want to restrict which user can edit the bank details of the suppliers? And obviously you want to tick the box yes. So what that then does in the background, it's going to activate a new view within the supplier within the supplier record. So within the supplier base, it's not a new view per se, but it's just enabling their authorization. So what it does is it'll highlight or it'll activate and deactivate certain things within the supplier record. So you'll want to, so when any of your existing users that you don't want them to edit the data, you'll obviously deselect that button for them, or deselect that option in application and user management. And so what you'll see is users without access can view any of the bank details. So again, it's a little, you might not necessarily want them to view the bank details, but their edit capabilities disabled, as are the add row and add remove buttons. They can add new banks, but it doesn't append it to the supplier record. All right. So just showing that real quick. All right. So if we look at just at one of our suppliers that we just created. So I'm logged in as Edward Black, and he's our general finance guy. So he's kind of our overall finance manager. If I go into the financial data of the supplier and click on the bank data, you'll see that I've got my add row, remove row, and new bank. Now, if I log out and go back into maybe just an AP clerk role, where I have this access turned on and off, or turned off. And we go into our supplier. And we'll go into that same supplier steel chasers and go into our financial data. the bank data. Now you'll see, again, I can't access any of these details to be able to change. I can't see the add row or the remove button. Now, like I said, I can add a whole new bank, but it won't append it to that physical supplier record. Again, if you don't have that, I would highly recommend taking a look at that. If you do, again, have a lot of people in your organization that can touch a supplier record. And our next piece is going to be our supplier. Let's go into supplier lifecycle management. So this is another kind of fun, it's a fun little feature in ByDesign that I stumbled across many years ago, and there's lots of different things that you can do with this, and it does have some impact on your downstream operational pieces. And I'm guessing a lot of people don't necessarily use this. So within the supplier record, there is an option called product categories in here, and this capability allows you to drive some different system behaviors in the background to either give you notifications about products within a particular product category that you're purchasing from, or can hard stop you from the purchasing process. So within here in the product categories, you'll be able to set up for any of your product categories in your hierarchy a sourcing strategy, and these are really just informational purposes only for your sourcing strategy, whether they're single source, only one supplier is used. And let me pop into one just so you can see it live here. Okay. Let's look up our stopper. All right, so if we go into just our product categories, you'll have your different options in here. So you've got a dual source, only 2 suppliers are used, a multi-source, more than 2 suppliers, single source or sole source. And again, those can be used. I would say I would use those in conjunction with like your purchasing spend reports to really see what your overall exposure is with a supplier. So if you have a supplier set up that it is your sole source and you are purchasing 50% of your supply from these guys, in a time that we are today, that should signal to you that you might want to get your vendor managers out there and start sourcing an alternate supply. So even though it doesn't necessarily trigger anything in the background in ByDesign, it's really a good option for you to keep these things up to date, so you can see where you potentially are exposed. If it is, especially like if you're manufacturing, if it's a key or a critical ingredient or raw material into your manufacturing process, or even on the flip side, again, even more so in manufacturing, if it's a spare part supplier or something for a critical piece of machinery, this really gives you a lot of information with to arm yourselves with to see again how you're exposed. And then you can also have in here your market segmentation as well. So maybe you do have multiple suppliers, you know, and whether they're, you know, it's bottleneck supplier for a particular product category, whether they're high cost, low risk, low cost, high risk, things like that. Now, where it gets really interesting is our engagement status. So you'll see that you've got lots of different statuses in here, from start introduction to release for purchasing, start removal, complete removal, resume, and then all of our sort of reintroduction into the process. And this is where it will start to give you little indications downstream within the operational purchasing aspect. So I'm not necessarily gonna walk through every single thing as it pertains to a purchase order, but I've got the screenshots, so we'll work through each of those just to kind of show you what it's gonna do as you work through the different statuses. So typically you would create a brand new supplier. As you create a new supplier, all of these product categories are going to be blank. So you can start to maintain one or multiple product categories that they're allowed to, or that they've been accepted for purchasing into. And then you would set their sourcing strategy and market segmentation, and then you can change their engagement status. So in the first part, again, let's say, most typically I'm going back to more of a manufacturing environment here, because this is where it really probably is. Manufacturing and distribution are going to be more critical as it pertains to parts, and most likely on all your raw materials. So if you are in more R&D or do R&D and you're sourcing new components or new suppliers with new components, you can specify that they're in pre-evaluation. So basically what this alerts the system, because there's no way to really delineate your purchases for stock items between something that's in R&D or something that is operational in nature. So it doesn't prevent you from ordering everything in a pre-evaluation status, because you want to be able to, as an R&D specialist or someone that's doing more new sourcing efforts, to be able to bring in samples into stock, be able to play around with them, put them into R&D production orders, things like that. So if you put this in the engagement status of pre-evaluation, as you're creating a new purchase order, what will pop up in the bottom in here is item 1, so for our supplier and that combination. So if I was to, because I had a life sciences product category sitting here, and this product for the widget is a life sciences product category because it matches up, you'll see that the item is still in pre-evaluation for the product category and can't be used in operational purchasing. But if I added another line item for something, maybe you're delving into a new line of business with them or new materials with them, it won't give you that same warning if you place an order for another item under a different product category. It really only is going to align with that product category. Right. And then as you're moving through the engagement status, so once you flip from the engagement status of pre-evaluation to introduction, that's where the system can hard stop you. Again, maybe you're good with what they're providing you and you're happy with everything, but maybe the finance department is going through solvency checking or anything like that with the supplier to make sure that they're good and that they can come on board. We can set those to an introduction status. And what that does is that will prevent anyone in the supply chain from ordering. So you'll get an error in here that the supplier is still an introduction for that particular product category, and then that order button will be deactivated if you just have that item. So again, if you have 2 items, you'll get that error that pops up and it'll signal to you to remove the item number 1, and then you can go ahead and order line item number 2 if it doesn't fall within that life sciences category. And so once you're done with the introduction phase, that's where typically it's going to be ready for production. So you'll see there's an engagement status, and I skipped over that, which is released for purchasing. Released for purchasing obviously is where the standard category is. So everything's hunky-dory and you're just going through and doing your purchasing. And then let's say they do have a blip in their supply chain and you don't want to use them as a supplier anymore. What we can do is then click on the start, do the start removal process. And so when I'm in removal, you'll see within your purchase orders a warning message. So again, it doesn't preclude you from entering purchase orders for new supplies, but it'll say it's already in the removal for that particular product category. Okay. Once I have removed all of my current documents, if you will, so what you can see, hold on, if I when you're ready to complete a removal, you'll want to make sure that you have eliminated all the open documents that are sitting out there for a particular supplier, because it won't let you complete a removal until any of these documents that are open have been shut down. So any open purchase orders, any contracts, and any open RFQs that they're a part of, you want to make sure that they're removed and they're not part of those anymore. And then you'll actually be able to click on the removed button for that product category. Right. And then once it is removed, you'll see again our options in here. There's going to be a hard stop on the purchase order record that says that item and for that supplier and that product category combination is removed from the availability of purchasing. And then the same thing would happen as it's in pre-evaluation. So that order button is going to gray out and you won't be able to submit your purchase order. So I know a lot of people ask questions on like items themselves about complete use up and things like that. This is somewhat of a little way that on the supplier side to get you more towards the smartness and being able to phase in and phase out suppliers for particular items, and then drive the different behaviors within the supply chain. And so from here, as you maintain this also helps you make more informed decisions on bidders if you're using the RFQ type process, if you're using the RFQ process within the system. So the request for quote for new purchase orders or contracts. So you'll see as I'm maintaining in here, there is reports. There are reports that you can look at to validate the what suppliers are used for which product categories and where they are in the process. It's called the Supplier Product Category Lifecycle. And that's what I mentioned a little bit earlier, that you can actually take this report and merge it with something like your spend analysis. So you can bring in this master data into here to see exactly how exposed you are by somebody that's potentially a sole source supplier that is high risk and high cost, and then make some more informed decisions about that. But if you'll see in here, I've got my product category of the life sciences, and I've got a few different customers here. You'll see that I've got, let me just double check that. We've got, let's just double check in here that we've got our steel chasers is still going to be on our remove status here. So let's just double check. All right. So we're going to change this to start removal. We're going to remove this guy from our list just to align this with the report. And so you'll see that I've got American Made Supply, AMS, FCC, Stauber, and Steel Chasers. And then Steel Chasers is going to be removed, but these guys are released for purchasing, and this guy's in removal. If I go into my system now and create a new RFQ, and I would say if those of you on the that are in here, if you haven't seen the sourcing or the RFQ process and you want to see it, just put it in the chat and I can go through the whole process. But it's also a pretty fun process as well. Who am I logged in as? Oh, that's fine. Let's go into our administrator who actually has access to sourcing and contracting. right, so we're gonna go and I'm gonna just kick off a new RFQ as opposed to bringing it in from the purchase proposal or purchase request area. When a new quote, again, the only thing that we really need in this quoting process is that we've got our submission deadline. And then you can select whether you want the results of the RFQ to result in a one-off purchase order, if you want to create a contract. And we don't need any of the other options, but as we start to put in our product, so maybe we don't necessarily have a product ID listed, but we have you know, just a product category, and maybe it's an MRO type item or something that we don't necessarily, we just have a description. We can type that in, and as soon as I put in that product category, which is either manual or driven from the item, if I do have an item that I'm sourcing, we'll see that life sciences comes in. And whatever we want here. And as we click on next in the process flow, we can either add our own bidders, but then there's also the option here that says propose bidders. And so the system will go through the list of people that are valid to that are validated. And so you'll see they've got AMS, American Made Supply, FCC, Stauber, and then, and you'll notice that Steel Chasers isn't on the list because they've been removed from the status. And then you also see an option here, FCC products, and those show up. The RFQ process is, again, smart enough, it monitors which suppliers you've bought that particular product category from, in addition to what you have in those supplier lifecycle, the supplier lifecycle management table in the supplier base management, and it'll bring together all of those options. So I think it looks at I know it's not within the last year. I want to say it might be within the last 6 months. So it's not going to bring up every single supplier that you've ever purchased from in the entire history of ByDesign that you've had running. It's only within an X amount of months behind, and I'm not exactly sure what that time frame is, but it's within the year, right? So that's just another way that you can use the supplier lifecycle management and in conjunction with the RFQ process to drive a little bit more smarts into the decision-making process of who you're actually going to send out your request for quotes to from the system. And I think that will take us to that's it for what I was going to cover today in the system. So again, we kind of went over four different aspects in here, which was the supplier approval process, the access restrictions for the bank data. We looked a little bit at the supplier lifecycle management and how that impacts your purchasing and operational purchasing processes. And then looked at how the supplier lifecycle management will work in conjunction with the RFQ processing. So with that, I will ask Kayla if there's anything in the chat. It doesn't look like it, but if you have any questions, please type those in now, and we can answer those. No questions?
I don't see any, Laura.
Okay, well, if anything pops up, or if you have any trouble configuring any of these things in the as you go back to your desks, please feel free to reach out to me, laura.herculo@vistaviewsolutions.com. I don't usually have that up at the end, or you can just put it at sales@vistaview.com and I'll get it as well, which is easier than trying to spell my last name. Or just reach out to your CEE and they can always direct it to me. All right, and I hope to see you next week. I'm going to go through all things mobile in ByDesign. Thanks for joining.
Great, yeah, thank you, Laura. And yeah, this recording will go out to everyone who attended today, as well as those who may have registered and didn't attend. So Those will be sent out, I think, 2 days after this recording. So with that, I'll say goodbye and have a good week.